Planning Committee of Woking Borough Council on the 12th October 2022. The meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with committee members present in the room this evening, while some officers are attending the meeting in person and some are connecting via Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. My name is Councilor Rochelle Shepherd-Dubé, and I chair the meeting. The Planning Committee is consisting of 9 elected borough councillors who are supported by a variety of professional officers. This is a quasi-judicial committee with formal set procedures which must be adhered to. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application. Then all those speakers who are registered to speak will be invited to address the committee. No one else, including borough councillors, town or parish councillors, or anyone else, period, agents, applicants, objectors, supporters, are permitted to address the committee, ask questions, or disrupt the meeting. Everyone has had the opportunity to comment on each application throughout the consultation process. Please note there is a strict time limit of 3 minutes per category of speaker, those being town and parish councils, objectors, supporters, and the borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you say rather than how long you speak. But above all, please stay within your time limit. Following the registered speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate each of the applications and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to try and reach a decision. Decision reached by the committee may or may not agree with the recommendation by the case officer. Finally, it is the committee's responsibility to determine any valid planning application presented before it using the national and local planning policies and relevant decision of the relevant planning inspectorate. Our role is not to suggest alternate uses to the applications, nor to consider whether they are a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they are too costly, whether there are alternative uses of the site or more suitable uses of the land elsewhere. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera is switched on only when you're speaking and that your microphone is unmuted only when you are speaking. Thank you. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor John Kaiser.
Minutes of the 2 different meetings of 2 August, first of all. Are there any objections to anything on them? Proposer and seconder, Stephen and Andrew. Okay. All those in favor? Anybody opposed? Any abstaining? The second meeting is the meeting of the 10th of August. Just make sure you're still here. Would anybody like to propose it? Would anybody like to second it? Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Okay. Any declarations of interest, Stephen?
Thank you, Rochelle. I have to declare a prejudicial interest in relation to item 45. I'm the executive member responsible for affordable and social housing, and the application under item 45, application 222001, is for predominantly affordable and social housing. So I think it conflicts, there's a clear conflict of interest between my participating in the debate and voting on this item and my role as executive member. So when we come to that item, I will leave the table and go and temporarily sit in the audience while there are officer presentations going on. I'll then make a statement in my capacity as executive member, and then I'll leave the room during the period when the committee is debating and voting on the item.
None, Chair.
Mark, would you like to introduce the application?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just share my screen. So I'll give a brief presentation. So this is an application to demolish an existing office building and erect 12 smaller units, which would be in BH use, E2 use and E3 use, which is storage and distribution, research and development and general industry. Just moving on to the location plan, you can see the existing office building in the middle of the screen here with the cursor. You've got Fish Ponds Road to the north. You've got Reeves Way to the south here, which is mentioned in my report. You've got Indigo House here as well, just to the west of the site. And this is just a site plan to show it in a bit more context. It just shows the landscaping in a bit more detail, this one. This is an aerial photo, again, just to show the site in a bit more context. And this is the existing building here, which will be demolished. The existing access is just where the cursor is here, and this will be stopped up and moved to the north, which I'll show in a photo in a moment. This is the existing two-storey office building. Again, I've got some photos of this in a moment. So this is Fish Ponds Road. You can see the existing building to Niagara House here in the middle of the screen. And you can just see where the red arrow is. This is where the new vehicular access here. This access road here is a private access road, and it leads down to the access. Again, I'll have a photo of that in a moment. So yeah, starting off with the top left photo, you can just see the existing access there with the cursor, and you can sort of see the tree belt to the south there, and you can see the existing office building. Looking at the bottom right photo, you can see the tree belt in a bit more detail, and you can just see one of the side elevations of one of the properties in Reeves Way. This is a photo taken from Indigo House. You can just see from the signage that it is Indigo House, and just to show the context of the building with that neighbouring block. This is taken from Fish Ponds Road, looking at the existing office building. In the bottom right photo, just behind that lorry, that's where the proposed new access would broadly be. So it'd just be in that location there. And these are just some smaller units in the vicinity. The ones at the top are actually directly opposite this site, and you'll see from the plans and CGI images that it's very similar in sort of the scale and nature. So yeah, this is a CGI image just to show the plans in a bit more context and to give a flavour of what it will look like. You can see it's 3 different blocks which will be subdivided into smaller units, and you can see the new access there out onto Fish Ponds Road, and it's sort of in a U shape with an internal sort of parking courtyard, which is a sort of fairly standard design for these type of smaller units. And this is just the block plan to show it in more detail. Moving on to the elevations, really don't add anything from the CGI images really. They're be clad in grey and they have some glazed elements with roller shutter doors. These are the floor plans. The floor plans don't show really anything of note. They're essentially empty shells as you would expect for these type of units for a business to come in and operate within them. And this just shows the existing access and the sweat paths the new access and the sweat paths onto Fish Ponds Road, and you can just see an HGV being able to get into there. So to conclude, Chairman, the application is considered acceptable for the reasons set out in the report, and also subject to the conditions and a Section 106 agreement to secure an employment skills plan. I'll be happy to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. I haven't got any questions from Mark, merely some comments on the application. This seems to me entirely appropriate application for the location. It is, after all, a business park, and that's where you'd want to see business units put. There are no objections, I notice, to this application, and I'm very pleased to see that we've made, or the officers have made, the recommendation conditional upon securing a legal agreement for the employment skills plan. That's, I think, a very, very good thing. And I think I welcome the prospect of new local employment opportunities. So I see no reason to object to this application, and I'll be supporting it.
It's purely an observation, really. Can I just have some clarification about the EV charging points? It says there's 2 plus 2 active and 2, I can't remember what the term was. 2 passive, 2 active, 2 passive. I mean, I'm sure this is what they are required to do. Is there any way we could encourage that there are more than that? Is it two per unit or 2 plus 2 for the whole site? Can somebody clarify that, please?
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify, active means ones that are actually being used, and passive means that the infrastructure is there underground for them to come in at a later date. In terms of the amount of charging units, I'll just look at my report briefly, but to give some background, essentially our policies have no teeth in terms of securing charging units. So anything we get, it's not necessarily a bonus, but we really don't have any sort of clout to request anything more than what's proposed. In terms of what is proposed, let me just bear with me. I'll just look through my reports.
I think it's 2, but what I
Yeah,
wanted to know, is it 2 per unit or 2 for the whole site? Because 2 for the whole site when there's that many units seems inadequate with the the climate that we're moving towards CV charging.
Yeah, having looked through the details, it is overall. So there could say potentially when they feel need to do so, there would be infrastructure for 4 in total. However, there's no reason why they can't produce more as and when they need to, essentially. But as I say, unfortunately, our policies at the moment don't have any teeth to take that further, I'm afraid.
Mark, do you want me to
Yeah.
add something? Yeah, thank you very much for giving chance. Actually, they have submitted the revised technical note, and according to revised technical note, they are providing 6 electrical EV charging active and 6 passive. So that meets our policy guidance in living state. That's required 5% active and 35% passive. So there are no two EV charges. There are 6 active and 6 passive charging point here.
Well, the highways officer's comments about the electric vehicle charging points be minuted, and yes, they will be amended in this report. Thank you. Well, and thank you, Rebecca, for raising that issue. I would like to echo many of the sentiments that Stephen made with regards to this application. I think the application is very clear and very comprehensive and has many merits. The design of the site and what's been proposed there has really addressed all of the potential lines of questioning that I might have had. So I'm very pleased with that. And I'm therefore minded to support this application.
And I have one question. Will the infrastructure be there so they can put more charging points in when they need them, rather than having to dig up the whole thing again to do it all over again? Sort of plug and play type idea. One of these days we do have to come up with plug and play so we can just plug them in when we need them and just very easily do it, because we are changing over electric cars very shortly.
Yeah, as previously mentioned, there's a split between active and passive points. So the passive points will be, the infrastructure will be there underground, ready to put the relative sort of structure for the charging unit. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be able to do any at a later date, but you're right, they would have to dig up the road. But that's why you often hear some refer to active and passive units. Active are actually there, passive can be there without too much work, essentially.
Wayne?
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned item 22 on page 21, which talks about energy efficiency. Now, I fully understand, and I know what you're going to say, Mark. It's ditto what you just said about the EV. But because of the delay in the movement of the local plan, we're going to get these coming up time and time again. And if they're only putting in 10% reduction, that means we're 90% short of where we should be heading towards. And the BREEAM standard is good and it should be around excellent. So I think we're going to have to just send this back, Brian, to the planning team to say, if the local plan is going to be delayed, we need to consider supplementary guidance on how we deal with this application, because the amount of energy this building is going to use compared to what it should be using, and all the technology is there, is not the kind of direction of travel we want to be going in. Thanks.
Can we add this in the future then, please, for the applications?
Chair?
Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. If I heard you correctly, Wayne, you said that the BREEAM standard was good. Okay, it's actually, it's very good. No, I understand that. Okay, but that's the BREEAM rating that they're aspiring to is very good, as described by BREEAM. My question though to officers is that, and I totally agree with your sentiments, Wayne, you know, that we should be trying to secure a much greater reduction in carbon emissions in developments like this. But my question to officers is what powers, practical powers, exist at the moment? Okay, so that's not going to be a factor in consideration in the determination of our discussion tonight. Okay, thank you.
That it's an observation to take forward, but if we're going to continue to get these coming forward and we don't have the local plan, this is going to become a very regular occurrence.
So, thank you, Wayne. I think it's worth clarifying that obviously at the moment we have existing local plans, and obviously, as you're well aware, and as we've discussed, and it comes up quite often, that they are out of date in certain regards, and especially when we talk about sustainability, EV charging, there's a lot of additional mechanisms and a lot of additional standards that would find its way into a new updated local plan. We're not there yet, as Councillor Smith correctly alludes to. Producing supplementary guidance to sort of provide clarity and direction is something that can be done, but it is not something that can be done quickly, because we have to go through a process to do that, consultation and other aspects. So again, in terms of whether it can be done, Chair, it can, but I think it's something that needs to be taken away outside of the planning committee itself, the same way with the local plan update. I think we're well aware of the limitations of our policies.
And also that's going to come out in the Borough Design Code as well, hopefully, when it's designed.
I think that would definitely assist in dealing with the kind of more sustainable aspects of development.
Yes.
All right.
Can probably be discussed with planning officers outside the meeting if we'd like to have information.
Yeah.
Any? We're going to vote now. All those in favor, please.
Just a take.
That's carried. That's unanimous. Thank you. Next application is 221788 Swallowbrook, Jukes Lane, Arbor Field. And we do have a speaker, and we will make sure that you're not filmed. And Pradeep is our case officer. Would you like to present the application, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just share my screen. This is application 221788. It's at Swallowbrook, Chalks Lane, Arborfield, and it's a full application for the proposed.
Yes.
Sorry. sorry. As a full application for the proposed alterations to land levels to form an orchard with raised vegetable beds. This is the location plan, so the application site, referred to as a paddock. Paddock is at the rear of the residential property known as Swallowbrook. This is the section plan. So the proposal involves the reprofiling of the upper part of the paddock to create a two-level terrace area with slopes between them. The lower terraced area highlighted in blue will be approximately 70 centimetres above ground level, and the upper terrace in green will be approximately 60 centimetres above ground level. This is a proposed landscape plan. So this will comprise of an orchard to accommodate the growing of apple, pear, cherry and plum trees, including raised vegetable beds. This is the application site currently. And this is a view of the application site looking back towards the residential property, which is currently under construction. This is a view of the application site taken from the adjoining byway. This is another view, a wider view of the rear of the site. And there's some more views from the byway. Subject to conditions set out in the officer report and updates within the supplementary agenda, which now includes the environmental agency's response. As the supplementary agenda shows, they have raised no objections. So what that means is, from their point of view, the applicant has demonstrated in their flood risk assessment that the proposed works will not be carried out within flood zone 3, and therefore the application is recommended for approval.
Liz Conley, would you like to come up and speak?
Slide 1. I speak this evening on behalf of the 8 neighbours who have objected to this planning application. Approval of the application as it stands will mean a substantial increase in flood risk, a change of the historical topography, and will negatively impact sewage and land drainage. Slide 1 shows the paddock prior to the excavated material from the new building. It clearly shows a very gentle slope towards the Barkham Brook, not a steep gradient as stated in the application. Slide 2. This shows the volume of impermeable clay-based material we believe is unsuitable for planting without importing additional topsoil. Slide 3. This photo is taken from the Barkham Brook. Sewage pipes run along this paddock and serve 3 neighbouring properties. These pipes may have already been damaged given the weight of the material and use of heavy machinery. There are covenants in place allowing access for maintenance, which the plans have not considered. This also shows the topography of the land. The Damming Heritage Report for the new building application, which seems to be ignored, states the site has evolved with Carter's Hill House as the dominant status dwelling and building. The listed building Carter's Hill House sits proud of the floodplain raised on a bank above the floodplain. Slide 4. This shows the very substantial flooding of the paddocks and adjacent menage. To the left of the photo is the applicant's paddock, which was submerged with floodwater. This floodwater completely overwhelmed our stables and on this and other occasions required emergency evacuation of the horses and severely impacted our business. This was frightening and dangerous. This is completely at odds with Woking Borough Council's strategic flood assessment report, which states no historical flooding has been recorded along the Barkham Brook according to the Environment Agency records. At least 2 houses were also severely flooded during these flood events, in addition to our stables. These were Mulbridge Farm and the Ford Bungalow. It also reached the front door of Julks House. Why does the planning officer's report assume there is a 1 in 100 year flood event risk when both ourselves and our neighbours have provided evidence of actual experience of significant flooding having occurred at least 4 times in the last 25 years. A landfill site upstream of the applicant's site has already increased our flood levels significantly. Also, the Category A dam just half a mile to the east of the site could present catastrophic floods. And global warming can only increase this risk. Thank you.
And the next speaker is Kate Vickery, the applicant.
Evening, everybody. Thank you. Could you move to the next slide, please? My name's Katie Vickery, and together with my husband, we are the applicants here today. In the short time available, I'd like to cover 3 points. First, what are we trying to achieve? Secondly, the risk of flooding, and thirdly, the heritage asset of Carter's Hill House. So addressing the first point, our whole approach to this land is one of sustainability and creating a house and surrounding gardens that recognise the environmental challenges of the future. We're keen to support the existing biodiversity and have already planted a 30-metre native hedgerow along the edge of the paddock. Our plan is to plant a mixture of fruit trees, wildflower seeds and vegetables on the site. A more level site makes our ambition more achievable in terms of gardening, for example, putting up ladders to pick the fruit from the fruit trees. But we've sought advice from both a landscape gardener and the chair of the RHS Soft Fruit Committee, and our proposal reflects this advice. My second point addresses the concerns raised about both fluvial and pluvial flooding. We have submitted a report from a flooding and drainage expert, which has been compiled using localised data from the Environment Agency. The report concludes that the site falls outside of the area that is at risk of fluvial flooding. The levelling of the site will not impact the floodplain or the manner in which Barkham Brook floods. In terms of pluvial flooding, surface water flooding, the report notes that there are no impermeable surfaces on the site and that the shallower gradient of the terraces compared to the natural slope plus the planting of trees is expected to encourage a greater proportion of rainfall to infiltrate relative to that running off. Importantly, the report concludes the overall runoff rates and volumes entering the Barkham Brook during storm conditions are expected to reduce as a result of the proposed development. Clearly, we do not want to cause surface water flooding, but from the advice we have received, the measures that we are proposing will ensure that the water will drain into Barkham Brook in a slow and more controlled pace. My final point is in relation to the site to the proximity of a heritage asset. We note that there are no objections from the Built Heritage Officer. We would comment that all of our neighbours have levelled their land to different extents. Could I have the next slide, please? The next 2 slides show photographs of Tudor House that also has a boundary next to the riverbank. The prior owners have completely levelled the garden and placed a brick retaining wall in excess of 1 metre directly adjacent to the riverbank. Next slide, please. Those 2 slides will show you the picture of Tudor House and show you the retaining wall next to the riverbank. Next slide, please. In the following 2 slides, you'll see that the garden of Carter's Hill House itself contains numerous level terraces and an exceptionally steep man-made slope that borders directly with our paddock. Therefore, to suggest that creating a terrace is somehow out of keeping with the area is totally incorrect. Thank you for your time and consideration of this matter.
Gary, are you going to be speaking?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Increasing the land levels by 600 to 700 millimetres, it's actually 2 foot to 2 foot 3 in old money to form 2 terraces to accommodate the growing of fruit, trees, especially in an area which has a long history of flooding, really is the question. The planning document contains an excellent report from Yellow Submarine Geo, which the officer report doesn't seem to give much attention to. The report covers the dangers of a failure of Bearwood Lake Dam, located 750 metres away on high ground, and which feeds into Barkham Brook. The report mentions no case of historic flooding, yet the resident submissions of actual flood pictures and Park Farm stables which flooded can disprove that point. The report also states that culverts can increase flooding based on a 2010 report, but it fails to mention that to protect the dam, new sluices doubled in size and leading to two 300mm pipes under Mole Road feed directly into Barkham Brook, which is also below Swallowbrook, and that actually doubles the capacity of that would flow from the dam if there was an issue. As a lead flood authority, the Borough Council failed to make any mention of a Zoll flood inundation mapping or the EA's inundation mapping, which shows the impact of Bearwood Lake's dam burst could have on Carter's Hill and the surrounds to a much bigger extent. I'm not convinced it's compliant with the NPPF Chapter 14 as written, and the recent comments from the EA, which respect to the impact of minimum changes of land levels, really needs to be noted by the committee. If the surplus soil amounts to 600 tonnes, if that's to be believed, it would be predominantly clay and which is non-porous. The land is reported as a steep gradient, which it's not. And I don't think it's sufficiently steep that an orchard could not be put on it as it stands now. I've been trying to gain access to the Borough's Council's approved plans for the dam works for the last 2 years so I could review the flood risk associated with it without any success. The impact of this works needs to be factored into development downstream in Barkham Brook, and it has not. The Environment Agency recommends that the proposed development is within 8 metres of Barkham Brook, and it makes the point that there should be no raising of the ground within the calculated 1%. Paragraph 167 of the NPPF states development should not increase flood risk elsewhere and should be appropriately flood resistant and resilient. So if the Borough Council has...
Okay, Gary, could you wrap it up, please?
All right, I would just finally say that if the land remains sloping and is unvegetated, there'll be no change to flood risk. An orchard will be beneficial in flood risk terms on the existing sloping land, but a change in land levels by 2 terraces of 600 and 700 metres would definitely change the flood risk and not for the better. And a condition that prevented level changes would probably be the best solution for Carter's Hill.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, Chris, anyone else? Myself.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think we have to be careful here to consider only the application site. So we're only considering the 2 proposed levels for the orchard, not what's going on outside. If there's flooding outside, that should not be relevant to our deliberations. We're told by officers that the new soil or whatever it is that's added to make the levels horizontal is permeable, and therefore it cannot exacerbate any flooding which might come from the orchard. Also that the planting of the trees will help rainwater to flow more slowly downwards, and the root structure will help the water to go down as well. I'm not sure whether the fact that the added soil will be permeable is actually a condition in this. I don't know if we could add a condition if it's not.
We could ask a...
Thank you. Thank you, councillor. Yeah, the soil that is on site is being proposed to be levelled. We can't condition that soil is replaced for any other soil with a greater level of permeability if it is not the most permeable soil. The land itself, the soil is from the site, we understand. And ultimately, any soil, any landscaping, raised beds, planting would be secured through the planning application, approved plans, documentations and landscaping scheme. So we can't necessarily change the type of soil to make it any more or less permeable as part of this application.
Anyone else?
No, no, from Chris.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. There's a number of issues that I'd like to explore further, if I may. Firstly, I'd like to follow up on Councillor Bowring's comments about the matter that before us tonight, which is only to consider what is within the red line. I'd like some officers' thoughts, on that confirmation of that, given some of the concerns that have been raised with respect to potential flood risks adjoining the two terraces within the red line. So I'd like some professional guidance, please, on the extent, if any, to which we can consider any matters beyond the red line. I'd also like to pick up on this issue of the soil that has been excavated on site. We saw some photographs of that, and in particular, a comment from the resident who presented querying the suitability of the excavated material for the proposed planting. Now, again, I'd like some advice on this, because it would seem to me that the nature of the soil that has been excavated, and which I believe is the intention to return to that land and to use it to build the terraces, could have very significant impacts. The planting, we're told, may help to retain water and reduce runoff. But is that based on an assumption, about the suitability of the soils for proposed planting? There's also issues to do. It's been suggested tonight with the permeability, of the soil that has been excavated and would be returned to that site. And then I'd also like some clarification from officers, please, on what seems to me, to be quite a clear divergence, between the flooding report and the photographs that we saw this evening, a photograph that we saw this evening, and a suggestion that there have been at least 4 flooding events in this locality, and a report which raises questions, apparently, about the flooding in this area. Now, this may go back to matters to do with the red line again. I do appreciate that, but I would like a little bit more clarity on this apparent divergence, and in particular, I'd like to get an answer to the question or issue that Councillor Cowan raised about the report. I think it was from Yellow Submarine, and to what extent did that figure was considered by officers.
Thank you, councillor. There's quite a few questions there, and I think we may need our drainage officer to jump in on a few of the sort of drainage and flood risk specific parts of the questions. I will start us off by responding to your first question, I believe, which was regarding the matters that can be considered outside of the red line on this particular site. The starting point is the type of development being proposed. It is the levelling of land. It is an engineering operation. The planting and, for all intents and purposes, the raised beds themselves do not require planning permission. To plant a tree, to make a raised bed in your back garden does not require planning permission. Therefore, what we are looking at primarily is the levelling, reconturing of the land as an engineering operation alongside the associated planting. But if it was just planting, we wouldn't be here now. So in terms of the engineering operation, that is not a type of development that is precluded in this particular flood zone, which is partially flood zone 2. And I think partially the edge of the site, red line, is flood zone 3. However, the development itself, the land that is being levelled is not within flood zone 3. And in particular, the functional floodplain of the brook. The photos shown to you do show exactly what any sort of naturally occurring flooding in a functional floodplain, which is recognised on the Environment Agency flood maps. As you approach a few more metres beyond the edge of the site, you are in the functional floodplain, which is flood zone 3A. That would and is expected to flood. The 1 in 100 year flood event that is referenced is not necessarily to be taken as there will be one event in 100 years. It's a probability. So if you roll the dice 100 times, you're going to get one event. Obviously, we're taking into account climate change, and so is the Environment Agency models. So we're rolling more dice. And as everyone knows, a week doesn't go by without a report in the paper about an extreme weather event. So the functional floodplain is out of the site where the brook is and surrounding lower areas. The site itself, and in particular the land being levelled, is not within that. And as there is no hard surfacing as such, just the engineering operation, officers in undertaking the site visit and looking at the soil that is being recontoured and levelled can only make an assessment upon the proposal in front of them. In principle, the development is not unacceptable in its location. I think the second point, which was regarding flooding and off-site drainage, permeability, the attenuation. I'm not sure if my colleague Bonnie wants to jump in to clarify the principles of attenuation with levelling and the increased level of vegetation on what is currently a bare site.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members, and good evening, officers. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. My name is Bonnie, and I am the Flood Risk and Drainage Manager for Wokingham Borough Council. Looking at this application in its merit, maybe I should just share my screen and so that it gives a bit of perspective. Unfortunately, I cannot share my screen. I don't know why. But what I was going to share would have been the flood map for the area. We
should be able to share your screen now.
Thank you. Right, so we can hopefully everybody can see my screen now. we can see the site that we're talking about where my cursor is, and we can see the different flood zones. We have flood zone 2 in the light blue, and we have flood zone 3 in the dark blue. And the development is proposed within the light blue area, which is flood zone 2. And when we look at the flood risk assessment by Yellow Sub Joe, it has done an assessment for the 1 in 100 year flood event with a 14% assessment for climate change. And the 14% for climate change is what has been approved by the Environment Agency as the climate change flood level assessment that needs to be done within the River Loddon and its tributaries. So the assessment, we deem it correct because it demonstrates that the raising of the land, even though it is done within flood zone 2, it is done outside of the climate change flood level. And like Brian rightly mentioned, 1 in 100 doesn't mean that it is only going to flood one time in 100 years. It is a probability, and it has a 1% chance of occurring any 1 year. And the way things go, it could flood this year and flood next year again, and it wouldn't flood for another 10-15 years. But it is just the principle of the 1% chance of that rain event occurring. And in terms of pluvial flooding, the proposal, which is leveling of the land, is supposed to provide an improvement to the situation, because even though it is a gentle slope, the flat surface means it is going to percolate more, and it is going to take a longer time to get into the brook. So it is supposed to provide an improvement to the general situation. And because of all this, it is going to encourage infiltration. There's going to be the planting of trees, which will help to hold some of the rainfall within the foliage of the trees and let it through to the brook gradually. So that on its own is going to improve on the situation too. We in terms of the soil, it is soil that is there already, and because they are leveling it and having gentle slopes and having it outside of the climate change flood level, these are all improvements that would lead to less flooding in the area rather than causing more flooding.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie.
Okay, Stephen, and then David.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. I listened very carefully to presentation by Liz Connolly, and she clearly, for very understandable reasons, has a lot of concerns about flood risk being increased. And Gary has clearly done a lot of work on this and has listed it because he's similarly concerned. But whatever my sympathies are for both Gary and the residents who are concerned about this application, as a planning committee, we have to base our judgment on the expert advice. And unless we've got some expert advice of our own that can be brought forward that matches that, or at least could be weighed in the balance against it, we're not in a good position to be able to do anything to allay the concerns of the residents. The expert advice on this, both from our own drainage officer and the Environment Agency, is that this is safe in terms of flood risk. And in fact, as we've just heard from our own drainage officer, you could put the case for saying that this application will reduce the risk of flooding, not increase it. So on the flooding side of this application, we're in a position where I don't think there's anything we can do as a committee to allay the anxieties of the residents and the local member. The other aspect of this application, which we haven't really much talked about, is the relationship to the adjoining Grade 2 listed building. That's Carter's Hill House. I think we always need to be mindful of the impact of developments on listed buildings. These are important heritage assets that we want to preserve for future generations. But in this case, it's very difficult to see or make the argument that the relationship isn't acceptable. And in fact, our built heritage officer very clearly has no objections. So although I have a lot of sympathy for the people who are concerned about this application, both the local ward member, Gary Cowan, and the residents nearby, I really don't think as a planning committee there's anything we can do but approve this.
David?
Thank you, Chair. One more simple question first. I noticed the access to this is going to be down the byway. I don't see any condition about any damage to the byway by plant or equipment being restored when the work is complete. If I've misread that, I apologise, but I would expect to see that in there.
The informative basically states that the byway is to remain open and all machinery and equipment is to be stored within the work area. So the applicant cannot store any machinery related to the works in the by area. So the by area is meant to be kept clear.
That absolutely isn't the question I asked. What I said was, if access to the site is via the byway, it's not about storing stuff on the byway.
Oh no, the access is not via the byway. Pictures were taken from the byway to
Sorry,
give
can I just
views.
grab one more time. Access to the property is via the byway? It's not.
Yep.
So we just confirm that.
I'll leave it as a question, but I might put it to the site. I understood access to that property.
So yeah, the red line shows access to the public highway down the byway, if that makes sense, to the application site, but it obviously relates to a residence which can access the site. The point to note is any condition of that byway, whether it would be relative to this planning application or otherwise, any damage to it will be dealt with as a civil matter rather than as relative to this application. We have a construction environmental management plan condition with this proposal, and if it was approved here tonight, it would require quite a few details to be provided as to how movement of materials on and off, machinery, duration, construction, and so on would occur. So there's an element of control there that we have if such an application was approved, whereas if the applicant was to do any works that didn't require planning permission, that required machineries, diggers and so on, we wouldn't have any control over that normally. So I'm not sure if that helps, David.
What I'm hearing you say is this application goes through, there will be a condition that any damage to the byway has to be made good. Stand corrected. The second point, and having demonstrated I'm already a simple person and only understand simple things, I'm still trying to get to grips with the flooding situation. Are we saying as a result of this application that land that is currently in the floodplain will be taken out of the floodplain and therefore water at risk of being dispersed elsewhere?
No. So the short answer is no land within the floodplain is being altered. The land levelling is occurring outside of flood zone 3A, the functional floodplain.
Okay, last but not least, I realize we can't ask for biodiversity net gain yet. The government still hasn't gotten around to doing that. But I would suggest that the borough design code include that as one of the conditions for building in the borough, so that we do help the environment in the borough.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's noted.
Al, you want to say something? No. Go to the vote now. By the way, there was a site visit by committee members of this site, and we were on the site. We looked at the site. We looked at where the Barkham Brook was and things like this. We'll now go to the vote. Sorry about this. Getting the microphone working sometimes is difficult. All those in favor? All those opposed? Wayne? Abstain? Okay, thank you. The motion is carried. The next application is 222-321 Manic Way, Woodley. And I believe Keith is going to be speaking on that, among other things, but not right now. First, we're going to have the officer go on.
So this is application 22321. It's at 52 Manic Way in Woodley. And it's a full application for the proposed erection of a single-story front extension, single-story rear extension, two-story side extension, and the change of use of amenity land to residential. This is a location plan. The existing site comprises of an end of terrace property within an existing housing development. And the additional land that is included as part of the application adjoins to the northwest of the site. This will be the proposed block plan. So part of the proposal seeks permission for the change of use of amenity land to residential to accommodate the proposed two-story side extension. These are the proposed elevations of the two-story side extension, be 4 meters wide, set down from the roof. A rear extension would have a limited depth of 1.3 meters and be 3.3 meters high. These are the proposed floor plans. So the proposed extension would accommodate additional bedrooms on the first floor and an enlarged kitchen and dining area on the ground floor. This is the front of the site. As you can see where the current fence is, that's what separates the existing property and the adjoining land. This is the brief street view, which street scene, which shows the row of terrace properties. This is the adjoining land, essentially over the fence, which is the ancient woodland. The main issues with the application is part of the proposal seeks permission for the change of use of amenity land to residential. Whilst it is a relatively narrow part of land, the area is ancient woodland and the impact arises from the incursion into the ancient woodland. The application would bring development further into the buffer zone of ancient woodland below government standing advice, and the proposal is likely to result in deterioration of ancient woodland, which is an irreplaceable habitat and does not meet the tests for exceptional reasons. The recommendation is for refusal, as outlined in the report, for incursion into ancient woodland, insufficient tree information, and loss of irreplaceable habitat.
Now, Keith.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to address the committee. Although I'm a borough councillor for this ward and was the councillor who listed this application, I'm speaking solely as a representative of Woodley Town Council Planning Committee. Can I first say that the comment associated with Woodland Trust on page 74 in the box marked external should not be allowed to stand. It refers to a previous application, 221128, and attempts to pull forward those comments into this application. My understanding is that this committee should be making their decision on this application and this application alone, even if this application is practically the same as the previous one. Allowing this comment to stand opens a Pandora box and breaks that core rule for committees to deliberate and reach a conclusion. So let me turn to the application itself. I think it's relatively safe to assume that if the complication of the ancient woodland was not there, it'd probably be recommended for approval. All the conventional points such as highway, street scene, etc. are generally accepted in the report. So I'm going to concentrate on the area of the ancient woodland. Later on, my colleague Councillor Swaddle will talk about the impact on the trees and the root system. So I want to concentrate on the buffer zone point. Interestingly, a supplementary planning agenda was sent to me at 6:28 p.m. yesterday, which included additional information on this buffer zone. It turns out that this piece of land that the applicant wishes to build on was designated as amenity land. We've actually seen it on the slides, and it's been mentioned several times, amenity land, amenity land. If this is correct, then as my understanding is that the strict rules associated with a buffer zone do not apply, because it's not a buffer zone, it's an amenity land, which is a lesser controlled area as far as I understand. So I think this is critical to your final decision here. Now, unfortunately, I have not been able to research this new piece of information for two reasons. One, simply lack of time. 6:28 to now, just didn't have the time. And two, the numerical references, including the paper, are not valid for the current planning system. So I couldn't look up the data that was being talked about. I believe the concept that's mentioned of passage of time, this is no longer reflected in reality, is a bit too much informal. I would assume that to change the designation of this piece of land from amenity land to an ancient woodland buffer zone would have required some sort of formal process. However, there is no evidence here, and I wonder if this is behind the reluctance of the owners, Taylor Wimpey, of transferring it to the council. I look forward to your considered debate on the application. Thank you.
Joseph Southwell?
Yeah.
The applicant.
So thank you for allowing me to address the committee tonight. I'm here with my partner today. We have owned 52 Mannock Way for just under 4 years, along with our 10-month boy and our 4-year-old little girl. So back in April this year, we attempted to put in the application via our building surveyor, that was Tony Grover, of which the council then needed to see a very recent bat survey and an arboricultural impact assessment before the application could be submitted, of which we completed both of these. So the bat survey was done in late May and the arboricultural one was done in early June, I believe it was the 4th of June. Together, the reports showed that there was no impact to bats, and then also there was no impact to any of the trees. So I guess from the points raised, obviously the main issues were around what we're classifying as ancient woodland. So further to this, so Paul Billen, he was the chartered arboriculturalist who undertook the assessment back in June. In summary to his report, he reported that the root protection area plan showed that there will be no impact to the woodland by the proposed development. Also, the development will result in no loss of woodland and have no direct or indirect effect to the woodland. So very brief chat from myself, but on behalf of my family, we want to thank you for your time tonight and hope that the information given by Keith, but then also by Alison after myself, will give a better understanding of, hopefully we can move this forward.
Thank you. Alison, would you like to come up?
Good evening. I'm Councillor Alison Swaddle, Borough Councillor for Coronation Ward. My ward councillor colleague, Keith Baker, listed this as we both support Joe and his family with this application, believing the planning system exists to empower our residents and enable only the right kind of development. We all want our residents to be able to stay living here in this wonderful borough, and we've heard about Joe and his young family. You will have read the arboricultural survey, which is covers the impact that officers have concern about. However, you will see in the survey that it identifies the area of woodland adjacent to the property categorised as ancient and semi-natural woodland, and it's shown on the tree schedule as W6. The root protection area plan shows that there are not anticipated to be any individual trees within the woodland W6, which will be immediately impacted by the development proposals. The proposed development is not anticipated to have any impact on ancient woodland and ancient and veteran trees, nor is it anticipated to result in the loss or deterioration of ancient woodland or have any direct or indirect effect on the ancient and semi-natural woodland. Therefore, I fully support this proposal, and I thank you for your attention to the application. I look forward to listening to your discussions and hope you will conclude that this approval would be appropriate. Thank you.
Stephen?
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Thank you very much to Keith and to Alison and to Joseph for their presentations. That was very illuminating and helpful. I do understand that both Keith and Alison are here as local representatives, and they are representing one of their residents and trying to get the best deal for that resident. And I do understand why Joseph and his family want to see this approved. It is important, though, I think, that we recognise, and everyone recognises here, that we as a planning committee have to approach this from a somewhat different perspective. We have to approach it from the perspective of the framework of planning policies provided nationally and locally, and we have to work within those. We're not here as individual council representatives. We're part of a quasi-judicial committee that has set rules that we have to abide by. And it is very unusual, I have to say, for elected members to seek to overturn an officer decision in the sense of wanting to seeking an approval for a recommendation of refusal. It's usually the other way around. Most elected members are trying to get things refused that officers are recommending for approval. So this is an unusual set of circumstances, and I think we do need to look at it with great care for the reasons that have been already stated. But I think the planning policy framework that we have to work in basically says that this is not an acceptable application because it does encroach upon the buffer that's required to protect the ancient woodland. Now, obviously, protecting the ancient woodland is immensely important. Again, just as heritage assets in built form are important, so is ancient woodland, and we have to try and to protect it, not just for the current, but for future generations. So we need to take seriously that responsibility that we have. Now, most planning policies have scope for exceptions. Exceptional circumstances could be cited to put that policy aside and to enable a different view to be taken. But we need to hear what those special circumstances are. And I'm afraid without those special circumstances that could encourage us to put aside policy, we are bound by policy, and we have to work within it. And although I have enormous sympathy for Mr. Southwell and his family, I can see exactly why they want this application to go through and why it seems frustrating to them that it can't. But we have to make a determination based on planning policy. If there's an exception that we could take into consideration, that would be fine. But I haven't heard any exceptions other than local members and the applicant can't see anything wrong with it. We have to, I'm afraid, base any refusal, or rather any overturning of an officer recommendation and a putting aside of planning policy on something more tangible than that. And so with great sympathy to the applicant and to the local members who are doing their representative role, I have to say, I don't think we as a committee are in the position to reject the officer recommendation here.
Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I note that on page 78, the officers consider the proposed extensions acceptable in terms of mass and scale, and that they would not impact on the appearance of the countryside. I think it was Councillor Baker who said that if the location of the ancient woodland nearby was not nearby, then this application probably would not be before us this evening. The overarching issue really does seem to be the impact on the ancient woodland. And the potential impact on the buffer of a change in status from amenity to residential. But I'd like a clarification of just a few sort of points of fact. I believe at the applicant's property, the buffer is 15 metres in depth. On page 80, it appears that if approved, the application brings development a further 7 to 9 metres into the buffer, potentially reducing the buffer to 6 metres. Have I understood these figures correctly? We've heard tonight a number of comments, very pertinent comments, about the potential that this development might have on the root protection zone, for instance. I don't recall whether we've heard anything specific about the TPO'd tree, but I note on page 81 that the officers have identified a number of other additional impacts that building on this buffer could have on the ancient woodland. For instance, possible impacts on soil horizons and the potential seed bank of the ancient woodland. And I think these must be, very, very serious matters, for us to weigh up. Apart from that, though, my next question is, do buffer zones like this have any special legal status, quite apart from their ecological roles, importance, and so forth? Do they have any special legal status? I would like just a little bit of clarification, if I may, on TPO 38 1971. Could we just have a little bit more detail about the nature of this tree, including an explanation of any potential impacts on it if the development was to go ahead? Thank you.
We would just get Bridget, who's on the call, to advise on the tree referenced, if that's possible. Thank you, Bridget.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I can't immediately drag up the TPO actually at the moment. Could you repeat the question, please? That what specifically you wanted me to find out? You had a specific tree that you referred to.
Yeah, I believe that there is a TPO tree adjacent to this site, and I'd just like a little bit more details about its relationship to the proposed development, how far it would be, what impacts, for example, it might have on the tree protection, the root protection zone, and so forth, if the building was to go ahead.
Okay, the TPO is actually an area order. It's not a single tree, and it comes to just bear with me. That comes to, oh, sorry. Sorry about the delay. So that comes to within 9 meters of the existing edge of the property. The ancient woodland doesn't follow the line of the TPO consistently. So the line of the ancient woodland also comes from the Natural England inventory, and that is automatically uploaded onto our GIS systems, and this is how we measure impacts.
Okay,
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. So I understand that it's an area TPO. Now, you stated, I think, that it would come to within 9 meters of the existing boundary. If I recall correctly, the application brings development a further 7 to 9 meters into the buffer. The TPOs, are they in the TPO area? Does that cover the buffer zone, or is it restricted to the ancient woodland? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, would this conflict with the area TPO?
Well, the area TPO covers most of the area of ancient woodland, except that the ancient woodland extends closer to the site boundary and the existing dwelling than the TPO does. So they're like two different designations, but the ancient woodland has the additional protection. I can show you the line. I could hopefully share you my screen so you could see the line of the ancient woodland compared to the TPO. But in a way, that's what's really relevant is the fact that it's ancient woodland.
No, I understand that now, so I think we can close that line of inquiry. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I have one more question. Approximately how far from the ancient woodland does the tree route go? So there might be some alternatives for the applicants to redesign it, talking with the officers to find some place to put some more space for their children, but to do so in the future. How far does the tree route actually expand from the ancient woodlands?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth noting that the application is being recommended for refusal for 3 reasons. One of those reasons is obviously the in-principle infringement of the ancient woodland. Yeah. The second reason for refusal is lack of arboricultural information. That information, the distance between root protection areas of nearby trees and the extension, is not categorically or has not categorically been provided. The tree report that accompanied the application did not contain information that it should have been expected to contain for such a development in proximity. Okay, so therefore, the second reason for refusal, in the absence of sufficient arboricultural details, council cannot satisfactorily conclude that the proposal would not have harms. That is a secondary and a separate issue to the in-principle infringement of the ancient woodland. So it's quite difficult to answer specific arboricultural questions without that information. That's not saying it cannot be provided at a later date.
Chris, would you like to give us that? Chris Huntington, wrong Chris. Would you like to talk about the woodland?
Right, I've got my mic on and my camera on. There's 2 things about this. That one is the buffer zone, which is 15 meters, and that's standing advice from the government's advisors on nature conservation, and that's to protect the woodland, and they require a minimum 15-meter gap. And if we're seeking guidance to what an exception is in terms of the NPPF paragraph 180C, and I think it's footnote 63, it lists things like national infrastructure projects as being exceptions to this buffer zone. And obviously our team is working hard to get developers to use this buffer zone across the borough. So it's very important that we get it right. On the and that's why English Nature recommends the 15-meter buffer as a minimum. In terms of how far roots extend, again, the British Standard 5837 recommends 12 times the diameter of each tree at 1.5 meters, measured at breast height. It was the old way of describing it. It's now 1.5 meters. So it depends on the size of the tree. So it's less important to worry about the tree roots. It's more important to worry about the buffer zone. And in addition, I just point out that 12 times the diameter. So if you've got a tree of diameter 1 meter across, when you're looking at it, you know, roughly shoulder height, I suppose, then you can pace out 12 meters, and that's the minimum distance required to protect the root protection area to sustain a tree like that. The roots themselves will extend probably double that out, and depending on all sorts of circumstances. Obviously, the ones next to this house have been cut by the foundations, possibly damaged by fence posts and changes in level as well. But they will extend many meters past the minimum required by the British Standard, which is 12 times the diameter at breast height.
David?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, with all my heart and soul, I want to approve this. I feel so sorry for Mr. Southwell and his family to be in this condition. And if we had, you know, if common sense would say we agree this and be upon our way, but my experience so far is that planning and common sense make strange bedfellows. I've been trying to grapple about whether this is a technicality, which we can sort of honour sometimes in the breach, or whether there is a substantial risk to the planning policies of the council if we approve this. And my very great fear, and just sort of somewhat enhanced by our last speaker there, is that if we make an exception here without a very good sound reason to do it, we are going to open up a whole can of worms for major developments and all sorts of stuff across the borough, which we will live to regret. And it seems awfully unfair that Mr. Southwell and his family should be sort of caught in the crossfire of that. And I really wish we could find a way around it, but I fear we may not be able to.
Stephen? No. And then Chris.
Yeah, can I just rewind a moment and go back to Councillor Baker's point? So are we saying, just for clarification, that the Woodland Trust commented under 221128, but they didn't comment on this application? That's the first question.
Yep, that's correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we don't know what their opinion is on this application.
Not on this current one.
Okay, that's the first thing. So then the second question is, you mentioned a point, Brian, around the lack of tree information that would relate to this piece of land. I'm not going to refer to it as a woodland, an ancient woodland, but I'll just call it, for the sake of these purposes, a piece of land. So I'm kind of at odds here. So had that information had come forward, and it was the information that would have supported this application based on the trees. I fully understand what Chris is saying. I don't use 12, Chris. I use 7.5 times the diameter at 1 meter high, but you're a bit more generous than me. But based on that, are we still saying if that information come forward from a tree expert, would that still not allow this to go ahead? Is the buffer just not big enough? What is the size of this buffer? So what is the size of this piece of land from the edge of the property to the other side of the fence? I mean, I know this area very well. I've had 2 houses there, and so I know what it was, an aerodrome previously. So I don't actually know where the ancient woodland comes from, but I'm sure it's there somewhere.
So I don't, in the report in front of you, the dimensions, that distance is not there. So
Right.
I don't think myself, the case officer, unless any of the technical consultees on the call have that information to hand in any other associated reports, I would have to say we don't have that.
Okay.
And I'll just give the opportunity for any of those technical consultees to jump in now if they do have it.
Yes, it's 8 meters. It's furthest away from the building is 8 meters. It's an oblique line,
Can you,
so it reduces
Sorry.
down. So
Bridget, can you share your screen, please?
yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
So so the distance, the furthest distance is 8 meters from the building as it stands at the moment.
Sorry, when I said share your screen, it's not that I'm very happy to see you.
Sorry. It's the first time I've done this. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Right, I can share the screen now. So can you see?
Yeah.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, can you follow the cursor?
Yeah.
This is the line of the ancient woodland. And you can see the edge of number 52. If I measure
Yeah.
the distance, you'll be able to see that the distance from that point there to the corner, so it's 8.7 meters. So like the buffer zone is 15 meters. So if I measure 15 meters from the edge of the woodland as it's shown, so that line is the line of the English,
Yeah.
Natural England inventory. So the whole, of the extension is within the buffer zone. So that's the complication.
Yeah. So in conclusion, Brian, regardless of what the tree expert would have said, it would have been trumped by the 15 meters.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes. It would. Yes.
Yes, I was just simply going to echo what Stephen said quite a long time ago now. It's very clear, this is not local plan, local policies, national policies, the NPPF, it's paragraph 180C, and it's spelled out on page 73. Unless there are wholly exceptional reasons and a suitable compensation strategy, then we should refuse. I mean, that's an instruction, really, if that's an appropriate word to use. But my only concern now is, has the applicant been given suitable advice to encourage them to bring forward any evidence that they might have been able to get, which could perhaps have helped them, in which case maybe there could be a refusal. Sorry, not a refusal, a deferment, to allow them to do that. I'm just trying to keep all options open, to be fair to the applicant, because I think we really would rather like them to approve this application, but we realise we're in a bit of a hole.
Is that a proposal to defer the application?
Well, perhaps the officers can comment whether was every encouragement given to the applicant to supply such information. I suspect that the information doesn't exist, what the officers have said, but we do need to be fair. And it says, I can't find it here, but on the applications it usually says that the local planning authority does try to engage with the applicants as much as possible. I'm sure they have done that here.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the council will always engage with agents applicants where there is a reasonable prospect of the scheme being amended in a positive way to allow it to be supported. However, in this case, as you note from the refusal reasons, there are in principle refusal reasons which will not be overcome with the provision of additional agricultural information, and so it wasn't considered necessary or reasonable to sort of give a false sense of hope that providing one would overcome the other. Ultimately, as colleague Chris Hannington has explained, it is a matter of kind of national policy, and the NPPF is quite clear and does not give much room for manoeuvre when dealing with development in such areas.
Stephen?
It's a recommendation for officer recommendation.
Okay, we're voting on the officer recommendation for refusal. As long as my tablet here doesn't decide to talk. Shut up. Sorry, it has no idea why it's doing that. It's supposed to say Google. You have to ask that, not anything else. Yes. No, Google is not going to make the decision. We're voting on the refusal, the recommendation of refusal. Okay, all of those in favor of the refusal? And that's you. I would suggest you talk to the officers of your next plan a little bit better. It might help you get through better. The next application is application number 222-304, Lane End House, Chinfield Road. Ariana?
Yes, good evening, Chair. Thank you. And good evening, everyone. Just open screen. You can see it. Good evening. This is planning application 222-304 for the proposed erection of 6 dwellings with associated landscaping and access on land adjacent to Lane End House in Chinfield. This is the location plan submitted with the application, and this is the aerial photograph. The site comprises an undeveloped field located in the south of the M4 motorway and is bounded to the north and west by land of the former commercial Lane End House and to the east and south by residential properties along Brookers Hill. Immediately to the east of the application site is the settlement of Chinfield. Bear in mind, in policy terms, the site lies within the countryside, but it also falls within the south of the M4 strategic development location. This is the proposed site layout. The proposed development would comprise a mix of 3 4-bedroom detached dwellings, 1 3-bedroom detached dwelling, and a pair of 3-bedroom semi-detached dwellings. Each unit would benefit from private parking and garden area with 2 unallocated spaces provided for visitors. Access to the site will be provided from the existing private cul-de-sac of Brookers Hill. These are the proposed floor plans for the detached units, and these are the proposed floor plans for the semi-detached units. These are the proposed elevations. The dwellings proposed would be of typical 2-story design with half-hip roofs, front gable features, and external materials, all of which are reflective of the character of the immediate area. These are the proposed street representations. The arrangement of the dwellings will allow for a triangular space between units 3 and 4, which contains the majority of the significant protected trees within the site. And the dwellings will also sit comfortably within their plots with substantial areas to provide additional landscaping and ample separation distances to mitigate any adverse impact on neighboring amenities. And these are views of the site as existing. This is a view from the Brookers Hill cul-de-sac towards the site. And this is on the opposite way from the site towards the development of Brookers Hill cul-de-sac. And these are other views of the site towards the M4 motorway. And these are views from adjoining properties along Brookers Hill. Now, in consideration of this application, a balancing exercise is required against the principle of sustainable development as set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, and as to whether any adverse impacts of granting permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the development. In this case, the social objective of the NPPF would be met by the contribution the site makes towards the local housing stock, along with securing the provision of on-site affordable housing. Economically, there would be benefits to the local economy during initial construction period and post-occupancy of the dwellings. As for the environmental benefits, this would be met through the protection of trees, landscape and biodiversity enhancement within the site, and the sustainable location of the site will also allow occupants to access services and facilities without the reliance on private vehicles. As such, whilst the site is located within the countryside and would be ordinarily resisted in principle by local planning policies, as demonstrated in the officer report, there would be no significant adverse impacts arising from the development that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh these benefits. It is on this basis that we recommend that the application is approved subject to the conditions as set out in the officer report. And we ask the committee to delegate the authority to officers to finalize the planning obligations for securing affordable housing and the infrastructure contributions for the south of the M4 and FTL, which are to form the basis of the S106 legal agreement, which is currently underway. Thank you.
Okay, Pierre Dowsett, on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. The application represents a resubmission of an application currently at appeal. Since we initially applied for the development, it is clear the material considerations surrounding the way to be applied to policies of the development plan have changed. They have changed so significantly that together with the revisions to the design that we have made mean that the reasons surrounding the refused application in 2017 no longer have the same weight in determination. The application is in a sustainable location where all practical planning considerations lead to a positive conclusion for the development of 6 houses. We're also looking to ensure 2 of the 3-bedroom units are provided as on-site affordable homes and EV charging points are added to each of the units. I have to say that your officers have done a fantastic job since we submitted the application in adapting to the changing policy environment, discussing matters with us, and presenting you with a thorough report that carefully considers the planning balance and makes a positive recommendation. And I would ask members kindly to support your officers and approve the application. Thank you, Chair.
Jim Frew. Jim, would you like to speak to?
Hi, thank you. I've been asked to call in this application by Shinfield Parish Council, who are blunt, to be blunt, are extremely frustrated by our planning approach. This is the 4th application for this site. Another example of how developers simply repeatedly apply with the knowledge that finally Wokingham will eventually approve. The parish raised objections based on the repeat application, still not complying with the policies in the Shinfield neighbourhood plan. As one parish council said to me, what is the point of a neighbourhood plan if they repeatedly ignored by Wokingham? This application does not comply with the parking standards policy, policy 5. It does not meet the drainage policy, policy 8, and it does not meet the tree retention policy, policy 6. And in addition, as already pointed out, whilst within the SDL, it is actually in the countryside. There are significant concerns about regards to construction traffic access. I realise that this is only a small piece of green countryside, but there is little green countryside left within Shinfield. And I understand the need to increase the housing stack, Shinfield has contributed to that over the last few years. What is the point of parish councils and residents producing neighbourhood plans and commenting on applications if these are simply ignored? I would ask that the committee carefully consider this recommendation and ask officers to find ways of complying with the neighbourhood plan policies highlighted. Shinfield Parish Council is not totally against this application, but it wants its policies to be adhered to, and I would ask the committee to consider those. Thank you.
David?
Thank you, Chair. I note with interest and a degree of concern Jim's comments about the lack of adherence to Shinfield's neighbourhood development plan. I would like the officers to comment on Jim's remarks and to describe whether or not in their view there is a conflict with the Shinfield neighbourhood development plan.
Thanks, Councillor Cornish. In terms of the Shinfield neighbourhood plan and the policies contained within, the same with the council's adopted current local plan, they fall within the kind of planning policy hierarchy that all applications need to be considered. They are material planning considerations. They are the starting point. The planning system, Town and Country Planning Act, requires us to start with local policy, the development plan. The neighbourhood plan of Shinfield is part of that development plan. However, in starting with the development plan, we then have to kind of move on to any other material considerations. In this particular case, the validity, the status of our local plan, unfortunately means that part of the NPPF becomes engaged, and that's this paragraph 11, which you will see written in the report, and the tilted balance. In a way, that exercise of considering the benefits and the adverse impacts of any particular development quite conveniently link round to what the Shinfield neighbourhood plan says. The policies of the Shinfield neighbourhood plan do specify that they will support development adjacent to the existing development limits where the benefits of that development outweigh its adverse impacts. Now, paragraph 11 of the NPPF, the tilted balance, requires the council to now consider whether any adverse or harmful impacts significantly or adversely outweighs the benefits. So the balance of neutral has been slightly tilted now. And obviously the officer has undertaken quite a detailed and is required to undertake quite a detailed assessment of this particular proposal. It has social, it has economic, it has environmental benefits. It also has aspects of development which are less than desirable, as every development does, whether it's parking or whether it's reconfiguration of landscaping or the principle of extending beyond a settlement limit. However, those less than desirable impacts are not in this instance considered sufficient to outweigh those benefits or significantly outweigh, which is this tilted balance question. So in kind of answering the question, the local plan remains valid. It is material. It is a starting point, the same way our local plan remains valid. But again, the strength of the policies which determine where dwellings are located spatially now is reliant upon paragraph 11 of the NPPF.
David, again?
Can I just come back on that a little bit? I'm not sure of the date of the Shinfield plan, but I'm presuming it is far more recent than the current Wokingham local plan. And my understanding is that that acts as a counteract to the tilted balance in the way of...
That's a very good question. It doesn't necessarily counteract, but it is a material consideration, and the objectives and aims of the local plan remain valid. However, the local plan cannot exist in isolation. It is within a hierarchy of development plan documents, from national all the way down to neighbourhood plans, village design statements, everything else that falls to the very local level. There isn't a default which travels downwards in this case. Currently, the national government have the same structure that we've had for quite a while, where it kind of cascades upwards. national policy taking precedent if local policy is out of date. So it's a very good question. I think it's probably something we will need to explore more as different applications come forward.
Stephen?
Thank you, Rochelle. But I wanted to ask Brian a question about the relationship between these different hierarchies. The point that David's raised about the neighbourhood plan and was raised by Jim about the neighbourhood plan is obviously a really important one. But my point is slightly different. I mean, we've got a conflict here, it seems to me, between our own local policy, which would be against development in the countryside, and a national policy, which, just leaving aside the tilted balance question, doesn't the national policy, the NPPF, now basically says if it's sustainable development, it should be allowed. So even without the tilted balance consideration, we've got a tension, if I can put it in those terms, between our own development policies at local level, which basically is against development in the countryside, and a national policy, which says there should be an assumption in favour of development if it can be demonstrated to be sustainable. And that isn't that actually our main challenge here, that NPPF effectively contradicts our local policy about protecting the countryside.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I think that's quite it's good. It's probably quite an accurate representation of the situation, but also I think the primacy, our local plan takes primacy over national policy as the starting point for decision making. If we have an up-to-date local plan which says where we want to see and where we do not want to see development, that is our starting point. Obviously, the NPPF is a material consideration, which we have regard to if it has anything else in it that should be consistent, I should say, with our own local plan. However, we're in a situation where our local plan, the spatial strategy for the local plan, where we are allocating our housing and the sites available that are being brought forward, is now considered by national policy to be out of date because we cannot meet the required level, required supply of deliverable sites. Yeah. So it's yes, in an ideal world, I don't think there would be much conflict or confusion over a development like this, but we're not, unfortunately, in an ideal world from a planning policy perspective.
I appreciate that, and the fact that we're no longer able to call on a 5-year land supply does put us in difficulties, and is unfortunately going to put us in difficulties for quite some time to come. However, I do seem to recall that even before this question about the 5-year land supply raised its ugly head, we were on applications quite some while back. There was a clear tension in some cases between our own local policy of opposing development in the countryside beyond settlement boundaries and national policy, which was saying there should be a presumption in favour of sustainable development. So I think that situation has been made worse by the tilted balance, but I think it's been there as a tension for quite some time. And we don't always resolve it by saying our local policies take precedence. We don't. In fact, I can think of many occasions when our local policies have not taken precedence.
I disagree with your comment, Stephen. I think I was certainly not aware when I was exec member that this kind of application would have got to this stage. But anyway, can we come back to this is an adjoining. This isn't in the SDL, the designated SDL. This is adjoining. Is that correct, Andrew?
No, it is within the SDL.
It is?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then, I do have sympathy for Shinfield. They were the first out of the blocks when it comes to neighbourhood plan. They were the first one in the borough. And as Jim knows, the inspector's gone against Shinfield. I think it's on 2 occasions, Jim, but he would remember. I think Stanbury House was one, and there was another. But I think the tension is with us now. As we all know, my little avenue of challenge when it comes to planning balance is our deliverability. we're delivering far too many houses over and above what we need to be delivering. And so therefore our 5-year plan is diminishing. So this tension is getting worse. And if we don't get this local plan quick, this is not going to go away. And I have a lot of sympathy for people with these, with neighbourhood plans, because Jim will also know this. We raised this with our Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, and the Chief Planner to say, what is the point of people having neighbourhood plans when they're not being taken into account when it comes to local planning decisions? But you're applying the NPPF and so forth there, that takes a slightly more advantageous against development. But I do have sympathy for Shinfield on this one.
Andrew's next.
Yeah, like many have spoken this evening, I too have considerable sympathy with Jim and indeed everybody in Shinfield who contributed to and affected by by their neighbourhood plan. I noted that Jim stated that, or suggested that whilst their plan would support or could support developments adjacent to development limits, if benefits outweighed adverse impacts. He did specifically mention, I think, that what has been proposed here doesn't meet at least 3 of the policies outlined in that plan. So again, I do have very considerable sympathy, with those people in Shinfield. But my understanding is, and I believe this has been confirmed from the discussion thus far, that the whole calculus has changed dramatically, as a result of the deliverable land supply now being below 5 years, and that this is a material planning consideration that we cannot ignore, or that we would ignore at our peril. If we were to refuse this application, we would have to demonstrate unequivocally that adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweighed potential benefits. And I am struggling to see how to do this. I noted that this application is very, very similar, to the previously refused application 163327, which the applicant's representative said dated to 2017. The reasons that were given for refusal, in that application, at least some of them do seem to have been addressed. For example, concerns relating to some of the matters to do with tree protection, on site and so forth. So I think that's one of the reasons why, we would find it, I believe, very difficult, to find demonstrable and significant adverse impacts that would outweigh potential benefits. There is one line of inquiry which hasn't been raised this evening, and I don't think it's dealt with in the officer's report, and it may be a complete red herring, but I would like to raise it nonetheless. Am I correct in believing that the site was partly a former commercial property? And if so, is all a part of this application considered to be brownfield? And if that was so, would it have any bearing on our decision making?
David? Wait.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that the entire site was part of the commercial, former commercial lane and house. However, the specific area was never brownfield. It was never previously developed land. It was always like greenfield, open, undeveloped land. That's my understanding.
Thank you, Adriana.
Yeah, it seems to me, and listening to Jim's earlier comments where he was saying that Shinfield are not wholly against development on this location, if I understood Jim correctly. It seems to me that the developer or the applicant could have made a little more effort to actually coincide or to meet the key policies of Shinfield's neighbourhood plan and win the local community over a little bit more than they have. I also note with dismay that I'm reading through again, I can't see a single reference in the officer's report on this to Shinfield's neighbourhood plan. And I think that is pretty, if I've read that correctly, that is pretty poor. And I'd like to ensure that future officers' reports on development do take account of neighbourhood plans of whichever parish it may be. Having said all of which, it is probable that if this goes to appeal, we're going to lose it. And in cold hard realpolitik, it doesn't do the count any good to lose on appeal. I think had this application fully met or more substantially met than it has the requirements of Shinfield's neighbourhood plan, I would have probably voted for it. As it is, I'm still extremely undecided as to which way to turn on this.
Sorry, yeah, if I can just make a point, there is reference within the officer report to the Shinfield neighborhood plan, and it is mentioned in the list of the planning policies that we've used to assess the application. And also in paragraph 7, there is reference to policy 1 of the neighborhood plan. And also I would like to point out, I'm going through the neighborhood plan at the moment, and the policies that are relevant to this application, which are policies 1 to 8 by my account, they all relate to biodiversity, parking, sustainable development. All of those considerations have been taken into account within the officer report, although it may not specifically in every paragraph or in each topic, it's referencing the neighborhood plan specifically. They are considered, and it has been demonstrated that they are all policy compliant. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I do note that point in my oversight, so thank you.
Alvin.
Just a small point. On page 91, it says town and parish council, Shinfield Parish Council raised objections on the following grounds. So that access to the site appears to remove a section of grass area that's currently maintained by Shinfield Parish Council. I mean, does that mean that they own that land and can actually block access anyway, unless without their permission?
My understanding, although this was raised as an objection, an objection or a concern, the Shinfield Parish Council didn't specifically mention which was the specific area of land that they currently maintain. So it was not possible to specifically assess that part. But our highways officer hasn't had any objections. They haven't raised this as an issue specifically. I don't know if that answers the question.
Any other questions or comments, or?
Right, can I just ask?
Yeah.
So what's the, you say that they're sustainable under the policies. Ditto my first question of the evening. So what is the way they're going to heat these properties, or is it just going to be a reduction of 10%? Yeah, so sorry. So this is going to be connected to the grid, I presume. These will be connected to the grid, and they won't be zero carbon homes. So will it just be a 10% reduction as per our current policy? I can't see it in here. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, so any new build dwelling in Wokingham Borough will obviously, as anywhere nationwide, will have to meet the most up-to-date standards for building regulations, insulation, and all the other aspects that require a particular energy performance level. That is separate to what we would require locally through our local plan.
That's right.
At the moment, our local plan clearly is not and has not obviously kept up to date with where we are in the world of sustainability. So one is above the other at the moment. In terms of the standard conditions that we put on these properties or on new build properties, this requires exactly what you said, and that's all we can secure. If we were to go above and beyond without agreement, the developer could turn around to us and say, "You just we've got no teeth."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We're going to the vote now. The officer recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions and informatives and completion of an S-106 agreement. All those in favor? That's carried. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just bear with me whilst I try to share the screen. I think that's working fine. This is application number 222001, which seeks to vary conditions 2, 24, 28 and 35 of planning permission number 202133, granted in February 2021 for the redevelopment of the existing Ghostwright South estate. The site is located in Finchhampstead, east of Ghostwright South, south of Whittle Close, and north and south of Billing Avenue. The application site forms the second phase of Council's regeneration scheme. The construction of the first phase of the project at Arnett Avenue, located northeast of the application site, has been completed and the site is now occupied. The approved site access points of Ghostwright South are indicated here with red arrows. The proposed general site layout, including internal roads, is not subject to changes as part of this application. The changes proposed here relate to the design of the scheme, condition 2, approved plans, and to alternative triggers for agreeing details of affordable housing, condition 24, and details of how public open space would be managed, condition 28. It is also proposed to amend the wording of condition 35. Condition 35 was originally imposed as it was thought that the scheme would be owned by council indirectly through a council-owned company. The original wording of condition 35 required the future owner of the site to enter into a Section 106 agreement to secure various planning obligations. The site is now proposed to be retained by the council directly, which requires that condition 35 is amended. This is because the council, unlike a third-party company or developer, cannot enter into a Section 106 agreement with itself. Instead, planning obligations would be secured through an alternative mechanism known as unilateral undertaking. The local planning authority would require details of all obligations, including the management of public open space and drainage scheme, to be included in the revised wording of condition 35. The detailed arrangements for the future management and maintenance of public open space and drainage systems are yet to be finalized. Therefore, the precise wording of condition 35, defining in detail planning obligations to be secured, is yet to be agreed. The works on site have now been commenced. The demolition of eastern section of the site is underway, as shown on the slide. The amendments to the scheme are sought to be agreed before next stages of the project commence. The proposed changes to the design are listed in section 2 of the report. Given the number of what are considered to be minor changes, this presentation contains a general overview of the amendments sought. The communal energy centre originally proposed on the ground floor of Block 1 would be removed. This would allow for an enlargement of Unit P54 to make it suitable for occupation by wheelchair users. The resulting changes to fenestration and elevations are shown in the following slide. The slide shows Block 1 with changes to apartment blocks that include the omission of planters, architectural features such as chimneys, changes to fenestration and materials. The following slides outline changes to the design of the houses. This slide shows changes to the design of the roof forms and elevations, including materials and fenestration. Gables to the rear of 3-story dwellings would be replaced with a hipped roof. Similarly, gables to the rear of 2-story houses would be replaced with a hipped roof. Changes to elevations would include materials and fenestration, as well as omission of chimneys as architectural features. Bungalows would also incorporate changes to the roof form and elevations. The current slide also shows changes to the boundary treatment, although this detail would be submitted as part of conditions application under condition 27. Here are shown proposed changes to bin stores that include amendments to entrance canopies and materials and elevations. The current slide outlines changes to dwellings on plots 9 and 10, 11 and 12 and 31. 2-story houses proposed on plots 9 and 10 would be replaced with 2 bungalows. 2 bungalows on plots 11 and 12 and a 2-story house on plot 31 would be enlarged to make them suitable for occupation by wheelchair users. These changes are proposed to address known mobility and access requirements of future occupiers. For the same reasons, vehicle parking spaces associated with plots 11, 12 and 31 would be enlarged to create disabled parking spaces. In total, 5 disabled parking spaces would be created. This would result in a reduction in 1 allocated parking space across the whole site. Notwithstanding, the parking provision would continue to exceed the Council's parking standards. The final slides that follow include comparison between street scenes of the scheme as originally proposed and the street scenes of the amended scheme. The slide shows street scene along Gorswide South, comprising 2-story dwellings. This slide shows street scenes in the north section of the site, south of Arnett Avenue development. It comprises the changes to units on plots 9 to 12. This slide shows comparison of street scenes of the central section of the site, comprising apartment block 4 and 2-story dwellings, south of Witter Close. The final street scene shows dwellings north of what is currently Billing Avenue and comprises 2- and 3-story dwellings as well as apartment block 3. Excuse me. In summary, the site already benefits from an extant planning permission granted in February 2021. Planning issues relating to the scheme in general have been assessed and determined under the original permission. These issues, insofar as not affected by the proposed changes, are not for consideration as part of this process. The changes to the scheme sought under this application are considered to be of minor nature and therefore capable of being approved under Section 73 application. The proposed changes were subject to extensive negotiations between officers and the applicant. As a result of the negotiations, the amended proposal is considered to offer a high-quality regeneration scheme. Therefore, officers recommend that the application is approved, subject to conditions 1 to 34, 36 and 37 and informatives, and that authority to finalize planning obligations to be defined within condition 35 is delegated to the head of development management. Thank you.
Ian, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Rochelle. And thank you, Joanna, for the report and the presentation. I'm in the unusual position of not only sitting in a different seat, but speaking with a different metaphorical hat on. I'm speaking to you now, not really so much on the planning application as on the background to it in my capacity as executive member for affordable and social housing. The application, as you can see, relates to the Gorse Ride regeneration project. It simply varies some conditions on the permission granted in 2021, mainly in relation to design, but also by reconfiguring the car parking to accommodate disabled parking. Now, that's all I'm going to say on the planning aspects of this, but I do think it's important to weigh in your minds how this fits in with the council's approach to tackling the problem of a shortage of affordable and social housing. The Gorse Ride regeneration project is a flagship project of the council, launched, one might say, by my predecessor, but I'm very, very supportive of it. It's vital. It's a vital part of our attempts to deliver more much needed affordable and social rental housing. We know, I think all of us, that there is a grave shortage of such housing in the borough, with many of our residents priced out of market housing. I hope, therefore, these considerations will weigh in the scales with you as you deliberate on this application in my absence. Thank you.
David?
And I've very little comment on this beyond an query about the change in designs of roofs. As it says in the notes here, the proposed changes are going to result in a greater massing of the roof forms by removing those sort of gables and ending up with the, I think you call it, joint roofs. What was the reason for the change?
My understanding is that the reason of the was the maintenance issues of the valley between the two roofs. So the area is quite rich in mature trees, quite tall trees, and there was, as I understand, a concern that the leaves falling from the trees would end up going into the valley between the roofs, which would cause maintenance issues.
Okay, so that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Joanna, for your presentation. I'd like to ask two very short questions about two of the variations. The first is in relation to the energy centre in Block 1. And I'd just like, really for my own personal satisfaction, to just understand a bit better what the function of that energy centre was and what is the alternative being proposed. I guess specifically I'm looking for reassurances that the replacement is not any environmentally less friendly than what was originally intended. I do appreciate, you know, the benefit of creating the additional wheelchair accessible, unit, but I don't want this to be at the expense, of something that might be very significant. And then the second variation, which I'm very pleased to see, is the creation of the 5 disabled bays. But the table on page 131 indicates that these, if I've understood it correctly, will all be allocated. In the event that this is not sufficient, would the road layout enable this to be addressed, so should a further need arise? And in a development of this size, would it be usual to provide some disabled parking for visitors, given that it appears that the 5 disabled bays currently would all be allocated? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. To answer your first question, the idea was initially that all of the substation would be located within Block 1, which is in the center of the site. However, following the phasing strategy, it was realized, I understand, that an issue would occur where parts of the site delivered first on the edges of the site would not have access to the energy, which would be located in the block that would come in later phases. Therefore, the applicant had to come up with a different solution. And what they are proposing now is to provide it through externally located substations. We don't have the exact detail where these substations will be located because there is still discussion about the number of substations required. However, we are proposing to, it's condition 37 is proposed to be imposed that would deal with the location appearance and appearance of substations that would be left to be submitted by condition.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think I've understood that now. So it's essentially replacing what was one central substation with one or more substations at other places on the site. I guess my concern was that I didn't understand whether this this energy centre might, for example, have been some sort of community heat pump or something like that, but it's clearly not.
Bear with me 1 second. I have to have a look at one of the plans. Please bear with me. There is still plant room to be retained. As far as I understand, it is the electricity that is being moved outside. I do not know what is intended to be left in the plant room, I'm afraid, but I can find that information out for you, or I can try find that information for you. Thank you.
And the disabled parking bays?
Yes. So bear with me. I'll just try to share the plan again. So there we are. So in terms of the allocated parking spaces, I'm not quite sure if it's very clear here. Those disabled parking space serving plots 11, 12 and 31 are located right by those proposed dwellings. However, there is one, if you can see my cursor over here, there is another one which is not associated with those dwellings. I'm not entirely certain whether there is scope to include additional disabled parking spaces. I'm not sure if my colleague Cameron can assist on that from the highways team.
I think, Joanna, what we do, we advise like disabled parking to be controlled by parking management plan. So suppose if there is requirement for the disabled parking, then they need to look at what impact it will have on the allocation of parking, allocated parking. So in this case, there is already they're meeting the standards here. So only a shortfall of 1 parking. So I don't think so. That's why the highway officer has not raised any comments. And if there is already a parking management plan condition is there, I think that will be covered under that.
Yeah. Okay. I guess my question there was that I think what's being proposed exceeds the parking provision exceeds the parking standard, and my question was: would this provide sufficient flexibility should the need arise at some point in the future for additional disabled parking bays, or to create some disabled parking bays for visitors and other unallocated disabled parking bays? But I think you've kind of answered that question now.
Just not entirely clear where the fifth parking bay in the bottom right corner of the previous slide, whether that's allocated or not. I'm not quite sure if.
Table says 5 allocated.
Oh, yes, I do beg your pardon. In that case, that will have been allocated as well. So there are not visitors disabled parking spaces proposed. In terms of what disabled parking spaces require is one extra width, and as it stands at the moment, there is the area available for parking has been, from what I can see, used up. So there are areas of landscaping still available next to the parking spaces. So I presume this would be possible. However, it would be at the cost of the landscaping scheme. But this is not something I have looked at, whether it would be possible in the future. So I can't give you a confident answer, but I can see that there is space still available around certain parking
No,
areas.
thank you for that. At least I've planted the seed of that idea, so thank you.
Wayne?
Yeah, Andrew's sparked my interest. I understand on 141, decentralized energy. And then I looked at your map on page 126. So in addition to the proposal, were you saying, Joanna, that there's going to be various electrical substations around the site? Which then raises another question. What is powering this? Is it gas or is it electricity, or don't you know?
It would be the electrical substations, I believe. But I'd have to double check this if you bear with me, Wayne.
Yeah, no, I mean, it could be air source. It won't be ground source because that would have all had to gone in by now. It could be air source, but it would have to be lots of air source.
Okay, just bear with me a second. I can have a look at the design of access statement previously submitted. Please just, if you can bear with me. Yes, I think we have moved, well, the applicant has moved from gas to electricity. So I do recall at the beginning, well, previously it was proposed to be gas only, but that has now changed. That sounds like a very fair explanation. Yes, I'm sorry, I was not involved in the original scheme too greatly, to some extent only. About, yeah.
Any other questions? And the recommendation is for approval. We're going to the vote. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Do any of the officers have any comments on the the appeal decision? Does anybody have any questions on the appeal decisions? Okay, then would the officers like to comment on the appeal decisions? Oh, you have
May, thank you. Obviously, it's slightly worrying that quite a lot were allowed, a higher proportion than we've got used to here. I know I may have missed it, but only one of the overturning of our decision seems to have drawn reference to the lack of a 5-year housing land supply. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, Stephen, that is correct. So a lot of these applications that you're seeing now have come through in the last 3 months, but obviously things have moved quite quickly the last few weeks. And obviously not all the developments, not all the appeals listed are relevant developments which would engage the 5-year housing land supply if they don't necessarily relate to residential or as redevelopment and so on. Yeah.
Follow up to that. If in these cases, it's clearly not the 5-year land supply issue that's got us into difficulties, is there a kind of explanation for what looks like a less good hit rate than we've been used to? Maybe we've been spoiled. We've had an exceptionally good hit rate, and this is more typical. But I would like some comment on whether the number of allowances, I'm not sure that's quite the right way of putting it, is.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think it's probably important to note that all appeals are different. No two cases are the same. And whilst there will always be certain cases where officers will probably argue quite vehemently that there might have been a degree of bad luck or a disagreement with the inspector's conclusions, we're acutely aware of the need to kind of have a renewed focus on robustness of refusal reasons, not just when we bring stuff to committee, but also when we make delegated decisions. I suppose what we always do and what we are planning to do is obviously continually review these reports, the outcomes of each appeal decision. We are arranging additional training for officers over the next few months to strengthen our reasons for refusal, and I suppose ensure where we are considering applications on balance or applications which are marginally unacceptable, all options are considered prior to refusal. Should we be in a situation where we are refusing applications, the reasoning of such decisions need to be fully justified, and thereby standing the best possible chance of being defended at appeal. Kind of moving forward, we are now monitoring decisions in a more specific way, our levels of approvals and refusals. We're scrutinising the cases and also monitoring the number of appeals we receive. So I suppose in responding to the data that's presented to you in the report, we are hopefully going to be more targeted in our refusals.
Thanks very much. That's very helpful. I mean, it does strike me that in at least some cases here, these were questions of judgment calls, and it's perfectly legitimate that the planning officers had one judgment and the inspectors had a different one. I think no amount of training is going to eliminate that. You are in the hands of an inspector who might simply make a judgment on something that differs from your own, because there are some areas where there's scope for judgment calls. But I think what you've said about the new approach, I think is very helpful. Thank you. Andrew?
Yes, thank you for this report on the appeal decisions. And I do agree that the new approach that was agreed back in April is very helpful. I do have a suggestion which may not be practical at all, but I'd just like to air it. When I had a look at the supplementary agenda before I came to the meeting, I felt a little bit overwhelmed by the number of appeals here, and I'm just wondering whether overwhelmed in terms of not really being able to get to grips with what was being reported. And I do wonder whether it would be practical from an officer's point of view, and whether they feel that, it would be a justifiable use of their time when you get an appeal decision to simply forward it to the members of the committee, so that we're kind of kept abreast of them, and this would help to give us more time to mull over, some of the issues with individual appeals, and may help us prepare us better, for some of the applications, that we consider. So, but I'm only suggesting this if you believe, that it's a good use of officer time.
Thanks, Angie. Would that include a kind of a very short summary of the issues identified as you've been presented here?
No more than what is presented here, because we can then go back to the to the original planning applications, and presumably we can also find the appeal decisions on the portal as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So absolutely no more than is listed here.
Can I just clarify one thing? That would be in replace of this non-householder appeal decision summary each quarter.
I wasn't necessarily thinking that. I think that it would still be good to have the quarterly summary so that it is there in the public domain. But it might give us more, amongst other things, more opportunity if we do have questions, about the appeal decisions to be a little bit more prepared, to have had more time, to prepare.
That's understandable and completely recognise that.
Something's changed, because when I was running it, or I was the exec member, all decisions went out to all councillors. All appeal decisions. I'm trying to think of the lady's name that used to send them out, and they haven't been going out. But they were. It's a bit like all enforcement, and all enforcement cases I introduced all go out to all members. So there's no reason why they shouldn't be going out to all members. But that stopped, and I mean, it stopped since about May. And I didn't know if that was a reason of the new administration decided they didn't want them to go out. Don't know why they would want to do that, but why you would want to do that. But it certainly stopped. Well, it certainly stopped.
I'm just looking through a very long list of emails that are sent around and circulated of the appeal decisions. They are titled "Dear Members and Colleagues," and they are to a mailbox called Planning Appeals, it does not show me the addresses, so I can't confirm. And if you're not obviously getting them at all, and we're sending them out, because we receive.
I'm getting them from my ward, but we used to get them.
Let me take that away, because we're getting emails quite often sent around to what appears to be all relevant members, but because obviously I think either they're blind copied in or it's going to a particular mailbox that's dispatching them, something might have broken down if you're not receiving them that way, because thanks Wayne.
Okay, if nothing more, let's close the meeting.
No, the public.
Okay,
Sorry, Al.
Okay, Al?
Sorry to be a bit stupid here, but on the appeal decisions, but where it says committee, yes, and then there's appeal, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, what, surely it's only when we say no.
So Alison, the committee yes or no means whether the matter was brought to committee. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a committee decision, because obviously it's whether it's an overturn or not. So that's hopefully clarifies that.
We're going to close the public meeting now.
Then we go to.
And we're